There are a couple of postures that tend to put a little bit of excess pressure on the knee, and it's not because there's a problem with the pose, but it's a problem of how we prepare for the pose and if we are actually open enough to do the pose safely for the knee. One of the most risky poses for the knee would be Padmasana, and that's Lotus pose. And often the issue is that people are trying to get their ankle in their hip crease, and they're lacking the appropriate movement in the hip to be able to do so. The movement that you need in the hip joint is external rotation. There needs to be enough external rotation in the hip in order to bring the leg up across the body and into the groin area safely. And if there isn't enough external rotation in the hip, then what happens is the knee will take all the pressure. So for example, if I didn't have a lot of external rotation, and this is where my hip stops, if I continue to bring my foot in, what's going to happen is my thigh is rotating out as much as it can, and let's say it stops here, but I still am bringing my foot to this place. So where in the joint is the movement going to occur? It's going to happen in the knee joint. My shin bone is going to go this way while my thigh bone is trying to go down, and this will create a shearing force in the knee. And this is a really good way to injure your medial meniscus. So a lot of times our ego gets in the way of our practice and we try a little too hard without preparing the hips properly or without recognizing that we might have limitation and maybe this pose is not for us. And if we do this with too much force, then we're going to end up damaging the knee joint. And because there's not a lot of blood supply to the knee doesn't heal very quickly. So we don't want to injure the knee. We want to keep the knee really safe. That's why I say if there's pain in the knee, stop, because there's not a lot of muscle around the knee. There's a lot of structures that can be injured, and there's not a lot of healing in the knee because the blood supply is scarce. So really important to focus on postures that create more external rotation in the hip. Stretches that build on external rotation without putting too much pressure on the knee. Another pose that can also cause the same issue with the knee and compression of the medial meniscus is pigeon. And a lot of people practice this, but because when you're in pigeon pose, the body weight is pushing down, okay? So you have a lot of body weight pressing down. If I don't have enough external rotation in my hip, then the floor is here pushing against my shin. So I'm going down, the floor is pushing my shin up, and the joint that's going to take the pressure is the medial knee on the right. So very often, a lot of people are careful when they teach pigeon pose because of this, because sometimes people overdo it and end up hurting their knees. And you might want to start practicing on your back. So instead of doing it on the ground, you can lie on your back and bring your right ankle over your left knee and work here on improving the external rotation in the right hip, because there's less pressure on the knee here and you have more control. So the idea is that you want to understand the movements, understand where in the joints do I need enough range of motion so that my knee doesn't take all the pressure. And so be very careful in poses like pigeon and Padmasana and work on external rotation of the hip rather than trying to get into any shape of the pose. And that will keep your knees safe and happy.